Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. If we haven't met already, my name is Kate Fox. I oversee the membership program here at the museum. I'm really delighted to bring members together to open up a conversation with our director, Julian Siggers, about what's going on here and what's ahead for us, because as many of you know, it's a lot. Just a very small piece of housekeeping before we start. We're filming this so that members who weren't able to make it today can watch it later. So if you would be so kind as to silence your cell phones, that would be super. So, like I said, if you weren't at least tangentially aware that the Penn Museum is in the first phase of a building project that will result in 75% of our galleries being renovated, plus a lot of other building infrastructure amenities, you probably wouldn't be here today. And because you're here for a director, not me, I'm not going to say anything more about that, and I'll let him talk about it. But I do want to take just a moment to recognize and thank you for being part of the museum. As members, you really are our partners in everything we do. Your contribution makes our programs possible in a comprehensive capacity, from our programs to our exhibitions, to our field work, to our school programs that affect thousands every year, to our collections care, you name it. So beyond that, your year-long commitment to the museum is also a gesture of your investment. It's really our dream and our goal to build a community of audiences who come back again and again, who, for the stories here, for the activities here, knowing that the Penn Museum is a place where they can find edification and inspiration. Always. And as members, you already embody that, so thank you. At this moment, I also want to give special thanks to members who have taken the extra step of supporting us as members of the Luminary Society, which recognizes members who give a contribution to our annual fund of $50 or more. You take the next step and really support us at a pivotal moment in our history, so thank you. Moving along, we'll get started with the real program. So today we'll be hearing from our director, Dr. Julian Siggers. Julian was appointed as Williams Director of the Penn Museum in 2012. He's the 11th person to hold the position. And it's really his leadership that brings us to this moment and to setting and implementing the vision for the museum for our future that will serve many, many audiences, from school child to scholar to university student to community member. And for our talk, he'll be interviewed by Dr. Steve Tinney, who is the Deputy Director of the museum. And after they get us started, we'll open up for all your questions, so I hope you've come prepared. All right, so Julian and Steve, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to get started with a quick video to introduce the project, and then they're going to take it away.
We come from adventurers. We come from explorers. We come from inventors, scientists, and warriors. We come from scribes and leaders and makers. We come from community. We come from family. The Penn Museum brings our story to light. For 130 years, the Penn Museum has excavated the treasures that tell our story. Now, with the launch of our Building Transformation campaign, we are embarking on perhaps our grandest excavation, revealing the museum itself. Over the next several years, the museum will uncover long-hidden architectural secrets, reinstall thousands of artifacts, and bring the wonders of our own collections into the light and accessible to all as never before. Perhaps the crowning achievement of our renovation will be the reimagining of our Egyptian galleries, where we will, for the first time, be able to erect the entryway and massive columns of the palace of the pharaoh Merimta at full height. It will be dazzling, unparalleled, the only pharaonic palace you can see anywhere outside of Egypt.
What an extraordinary moment for Penn. This is a majestic fusion of art and engineering. Built for the son of Ramses II, it will be a Philadelphia landmark and a magnet for visitors from across the world.
There isn't anything like it. Scholars around the world come to the University of Pennsylvania Museum to study these pieces. They are very important. Everybody knows about them, and everybody includes them in their research.
So what we work on here, it's not the same things that you see in history books. It's the physical remains that people leave behind. So in many ways, it's much more personal than what you get because it's everyday people, the things that they use, their cups, their spoons, and it helps give you a better picture of what everyday life was like.
Whether you're in grade school or graduate studies, coming face to face with artifacts of this magnitude brings history to life, vividly.
My students get to have an experience looking at artifacts and being able to prepare themselves for the museum. And then when they come here, they get to learn how Egyptians make mummies. They get to see the incredible Egyptian galleries that they have here. Reading about something in a textbook is one thing, but to be able to come into a space where the past meets the present, that's a really special experience.
I love the Penn Museum for 3 reasons. It encourages curiosity, promotes learning, and celebrates diversity. Learning from history gives us a deeper understanding of who we are and who the people around us are. It gives us a much stronger culture, a much stronger society, a much more forgiving society. It makes us better people.
Every day, we are discovering, preserving, interpreting, and understanding a little more about where we came from. We want everybody to know we house your story, so this is your home. Join us as we mount an extraordinary expedition that will bring Penn Museum itself and all of its treasures into the light. Well, first of all, I'd like to also echo Kate's grateful thanks for all you do for our museum. And we are so deeply appreciative of everything that our members do for us. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming in on this rather sticky day as well.
Thank you, Julian. I'm also very happy to welcome you here. Some very familiar faces from some of the other events we've done over the years connected with this. So the format is I'm going to ask Julian some questions, and the first one is perhaps the biggest question: what is building transformation? Mm-hmm. What does this refer to?
Well, Kate alluded to it a little earlier. I mean, this is the biggest transformation of our building that we've ever done. Now, this museum, as you know, has been around for about 130 years, and we've excavated all over the globe and have, built this remarkable collection, a collection that's really unlike any other in the States in particular, as we mostly excavated it ourselves. And our focus has often really been on research and teaching, but when I came here, I saw there was an amazing opportunity to really reimagine the gallery spaces that we have here. I mean, many of our galleries haven't changed for some cases, 70, 80 years. And so this was a wonderful opportunity for us to rethink how we're going to tell the story of humanity, our story, and its interconnectivity across really 44,000 square feet of new gallery space. And you see the new first one, of which we've just recently unveiled, of course, is the Middle Eastern Gallery. But on top of that, we were going to use this project to actually put HVAC in the majority of the building, as you can tell on a day like this. I mean, it essentially means that in the hot summer months we are very, very limited here. And of course, it's a lot better for the stewardship of this collection too. But we were also really keen to address the visitor experience here, to make this a pleasurable experience. And so that's involving 2 new elevators, a new stairwell, new wayfinding. And so it's a pretty dramatic rethinking of this museum. And it's also one that's not just about the galleries and the building itself, but it's about how we work and how we operate as a museum. So it's very exciting. It's wonderful to have the Middle Eastern galleries open because it's tangible evidence of what this museum is now going to look like. It's an ambitious campaign. It's around $102 million, and we're way over halfway of raising that. But it's a very exciting time because the university itself has embarked on its own campaign, of which we are a component, and we are thrilled to have the support of our president, Dr. Amy Gutman, who is really helping us with every level of this project. So. That's sort of the project in a sort of in a capsule. And I'm really pleased that that members will have an opportunity to watch this be unveiled over the coming years.
Very good. Well, so as coordinating curator, which is what I ended up being called on the Middle East galleries, perhaps I could have a small sidebar and talk about that for a few minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It was a really interesting, long and complicated ride, I can tell you. I'm not sure that any of us knew 3.5 years ago just how much work would be required in this, and how much of it would be done in the last 6 months. These projects seem to accelerate as they reach their end point. But it was a fantastic experience. I think a lot of you know that there's a very large group of people worked on these galleries. It takes a village to raise a gallery like this. And we talk quite often about the 10 curators that were involved. But really that's only the tip of the iceberg. And managing that group with the designers and the interpreters and our learning programs department and our exhibits department and our conservation department and everything else that's gone into these galleries was really actually both a fantastic and sometimes nerve-wracking experience, but also a great experience for the things we're going to be doing in the next 5 years. It was a really good one to cut our teeth on, in part because the gallery space had already been renovated, finishing in 2013, so that was a good start. And I think we're all very grateful to the support of the membership, and I know some of you, as I said, have come on members behind-the-scenes tours and that sort of thing. We're getting great feedback from you and from others. The president, as Julian mentioned, is a huge fan of the museum at present, and she loves the galleries. And I was just going to share, as I said to Julian, over the last month or so, we've had several academic visitors in the museum from other institutions, both in the US. Just this weekend, we have a couple of professors from Italy, from Rome and Perugia, and Augusta McMahon from Cambridge, and these people are familiar with the great Middle Eastern collections of the world and the great museums of the world, and every single one of them is wowed by these galleries. So we're really looking forward to carrying that forward as we do more building transformations, of course. So what will the next major renovation as part of the building transformation look like?
I'll just say a little bit more about the Middle Eastern. You may wonder
Sure.
why we chose to do the Middle Eastern galleries first, and it really is for a number of reasons. This museum's expeditions really started off in the Middle East, with the site of Nippur, but we went on to excavate dozens of sites all over the Near East. So that was one reason, and the other reason was, of course, it's telling one of the most pivotal moments of the human story, which is this transition around 10,000 years ago where we stop being hunter-gatherers and start being farmers, which of course very quickly leads on to the first cities. So it tells a story that's not only important, but in many ways a story that we are still living right now as increasingly more people are become urban dwellers. So we felt it had a particular relevance. So that's the first big one to open. We've moved straight on to the African galleries, where we have Tukufu Zubiri and a team of 5 specialists who are helping him reinterpret our very significant African collections. And we also will be opening at the same time, this is September 2019, our galleries of Mexico and Central America. And as many of you know, some of the great Mayan excavations like Tikal and Copan were done by this museum. So it was a wonderful way for us to showcase the work that we've done there. So those galleries open simultaneously, but at the same time we have the great reveal of the first phase of the renovation. So that includes things like the Harrison Auditorium, the elevators I was telling you about, and a completely reimagined entryway experience.
Let's talk a bit more about the Mesoamerican and African galleries, if you would. How will they change the way the central core of the building looks and feels?
I think it's going to have a pretty profound change, actually, because it essentially means that all of the galleries on the floor above us will have been done, complete with the new entranceway. The Mesoamerican Collection is being curated by Simon Martin, who is a great specialist in Mayan epigraphy. And it's telling the story not just of the Maya, it's telling the story of the whole region that's going on there. We have a very close working relationship with the PMA, and so they are lending us some objects that we don't have. We have a poor Aztec collection, for example, so they're lending us some objects from there. The African collection is one I'm personally very excited about. It's an unusual collection for us in that it was not excavated; it was collected, and so we really want to not shy away from the fact that these were collected in a colonial context, and there are the issues surrounding that. We want to sort of address that head on, and Tukufu and his team of specialists are very keen to actually tell that part of the story, as well as to showcase these magnificent pieces from all over Africa.
And I think it's fair to say that we made that decision to showcase that story before Black Panther came out.
We did.
Right? Yeah. Just for clarity.
Yeah, that's it. Although that was, that's a really pivotal movie for museums. I mean, we've noticed that the kids who come in school groups have a whole different set of questions than they used to.
Yeah, very good. So you mentioned the Harrison Auditorium. Obviously, we're both doing gallery renovations and building transformation of the infrastructure of the place. Talk a little bit more about the Harrison Auditorium groundbreaking and chair removal, and what Harrison's going to look like.
Well, the Harrison Auditorium is a remarkable space. When Norman Foster came here to give a talk about the buildings he's doing in Philadelphia, he was saying that Guastavino Vaulting was one of his big architectural inspirations, and so it's also a very large space. So its renovation is going to allow us to really amp up our programming. It seats around, I think the number of seats actually shrinks because of ADA accessibility, so it'll be about 680, I believe, seats, but that's still a very large venue. And it's going to give us a potential to work not only with our own programmers here, but with programmers around the campus, and perhaps with external partners as well. I mean, it has an entrance to it that's actually separated from the museum. And what we're doing is, if you look at the front hall now, there's a wall that's gone up, where we're going to remove the staircase behind the wall and open up the original staircases that are on your left and right as you enter the building. And there's also another entrance that you could get, which is what's now a car park, but when we're finished will be a beautiful garden.
Yeah,
as well. So I'm very pleased about that.
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic. And I mean, I think that one of the things that very few people realize is how few spaces on campus there are at that size. There's Irvine, which is bigger, but there are very few large auditoriums on campus, so it's very heavily used by the Penn community as well. And it's great to think that we'll be able to offer them such nice accommodations. The other thing I would just mention, for those of you who are local, as I think many of you are, Guastavino Vaults are a thing. In late 19th century, Guastavino was a designer who had his own way of doing these vaults. There is a local one at St. Francis de Sales Church. The big dome there is by the same designer. And for those of you who want to do more in-depth research, more diligent research, I recommend the Oyster Bar at the Grand Central Terminal in New York, which is also a Guastavino vault, which was in fact renovated by the same architects as are doing our building transformation, Black and Tang. I did go to the Oyster Bar to check this out. So, you talked a little bit about this. Talk to me about how the signature galleries that we're doing now change the game for the museum. How are they different?
Well, they're different in many ways from the galleries that we found here. First and foremost, I mean, these are world-class galleries which have world-class fittings. One of the first things you'll notice in the Middle Eastern galleries, of course, is this superb casework and attention to lighting that's there. We feel that not only do we tell this very important story, but we're unusual in that we're a site of ongoing discovery. It's not that we used to work in Egypt and the Middle East, we still do. And so we wanted the galleries to highlight the work that we do as a museum, every summer and every fall when we actually go back into the field. And so if you'll notice, we have moments in the gallery where we talk about not only the digs, but the work that we're doing right now. And then, of course, we wanted these galleries to be comprehensible not only by a scholarly audience, but by a general audience too. So they were designed very much with our learning programs in mind, so they can be used to teach not just undergraduates, but K-12 kids as well. And of course, we also, we wanted to showcase some of the greatest, frankly, masterpieces of ancient art that's held anywhere. And you can particularly see that in the Middle Eastern galleries with the material from
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I found most satisfying about the Middle East galleries, I have to say. It was a very interesting process to go through it with the designers and to have 10 people in a room, each saying, I want 1,000 objects. Well, you can't. You can't have 10,000 objects in the gallery, okay? In the end, we got as many in there as we possibly could, right? But as the design went forward and we had various 2D and 3D modeling processes for it, what they were doing was very striking, because although it may not be very obvious to you when you walk in, next time you go back, think about the staging of the galleries in terms of the closed and open spaces. And when you first go in, you go through a little loop, and you go into that corner and you have to come back out again. You go into the room with ore, and in fact, half of that room for ore has really only a few star objects in it. The ram and the thicket, the bull, and Pu'abi. And if you think about that, they quietly took 1/6 of the gallery space and dedicated it to these really, really important objects, which was very nice that they did that. So the quality of the galleries is not the only thing that impacts visitors, and we've discussed this a little bit before, but give us a more holistic overview of how the changes in the gallery and the building impact the visitor experience.
Right. Well, there's the obvious ones, in that the whole building will become ADA accessible, which is very important to us. Then there's also the fact that you'll be able to visit here in July without having a stroke, which is rather helpful. But in fact, what we're trying to do is we're trying to rethink how people navigate this building as well, and to do it. It's a challenging building because it was built in 5 different episodes, right, and with not much reference to each other. So we've been wrestling with how we can get people to enjoy the building in the most logical way. Some of the things we can't help. I mean, there's only one place that the palace could go. It's in that hallway that was actually built for it. But in fact, what we want people to do is to come to this museum and leave with a completely different idea of who we are and where we came from. And that's, we started, with the important stories of the Middle East, but we were going to continue that through every gallery that we go through.
Yeah. And there's quite a lot of engineering involved, isn't there, in making this happen? For example, I'm thinking of the Harrison end of the building where there are multiple floors to be leveled and elevators and so forth.
Right.
And how the major stairs are going to go away.
The major stairs going away, the side ones get opened up. The 2 elevators also service that space too. I think that's going to make a really dramatic difference as well.
And more washrooms, I hear.
And more washrooms. So washrooms in Egypt, new washrooms down there, new washrooms in Upper and Lower Egypt too. So essentially this renovation is going to sort of move the needle for us on every single level, we hope.
Yeah. So we've done a lot of work already. We've got a daunting time ahead of us. What are the biggest challenges you foresee, and what do you most look forward to?
I actually look forward to the opening of all the galleries. I find that's a wonderful experience when you first walk into a completed gallery. The biggest challenge is without a doubt going to be the Egyptian galleries, for a number of reasons. This is essentially a 100-year story arc that we've found ourselves in right now. So when the Penn excavator, Clarence Fisher, discovers the Palace of Merimta, I don't know if it's behind me or not, on the banks of basically on the banks of the Nile, it's been sealed in alluvial silts for thousands of years, and then he basically writes to the director at the time, and they build the wing that's where Upper and Lower Egypt is at that time. And they build that huge hall in Upper Egypt to house the palace. But they make a mistake in that that had some miscommunication with the architect, and the floor can't hold the weight of the palace. I mean, these obelisks behind that you see sort of where the doorway is there, those weigh around 15 tons each. And so it was basically put on hold for all of these years. And then with our new architects, Blackman Tang, they spoke to a specialist in Guastavino Vaults at MIT, and he found a way to reinforce Lower Egypt by putting these tie bars in that will basically keep the walls together when we place this huge weight on top of them. But to get these columns, these obelisks and doorways and all the elements of the palace up to Upper Egypt, we're going to have to knock a hole in the building and take them up by, some of them can come up where the new elevator shaft will be, but some may have to actually leave the building and come back in. And of course, this is rather nerve-wracking for a director to actually be sort of doing that sort of physical damage to the building. The architects are very sanguine about it. They're sort of blasé about it. But I mean,
well, they're not engineers, are they?
Yes. But I'm assured that this is structurally sound. But one of the pieces of work actually that we're doing this fall is a really in-depth survey of where these heavy objects are best to be placed, because there are only so many areas we can have these obelisks. They're going to have to go right against the wall, but that's fine because that's where they probably should be. But it's going to be a challenge. And the other thing that's quite difficult with these architectural elements is they've absorbed a lot of salt from the water on the banks of the Nile. And over time, they are exuding this salt too, and so there is a conservation process that can stabilize this. But we've started work on the conservation already. It doesn't really affect the structural integrity as such, but it can affect the surface, and so we're going to have a huge team of conservators who are actually dedicated to just doing that. If you're in Lower Egypt, you could probably see that conservation area where they're working on the funerary chapel of Kaipura, and so that's another great architectural thing that will be in Lower Egypt, and it's Lower Egypt where we're going to deal with the story of the afterlife, and Upper Egypt is more where the palace is more about kingship. Yeah. But I mean that's going to be the biggest thing this museum's ever done. But the rewards are going to be spectacular. I mean, this will be the only place you can go to see this palace, as we alluded to in that short film. It's also, we were at the British Museum recently, and 80% of the people who go to the British Museum go to see the Egyptian collections. It's a huge draw. And at the Met, the most popular object in the Met is their temple, their Egyptian, which is frankly nowhere near as good as ours. So I mean, I think it will be a real game changer, these galleries, for the museum. And of course, we still work there. I mean, even this last Christmas, we were visiting the Penn excavations at Abydos, where they found a completely new pharaoh a couple of years ago. And I have to admit, going into the tunnel, it's 50 meters underground. It was a bit more than many of us bargained for. It's pretty claustrophobic down there. And we also have another project at Saqqara, which is just out of Cairo, and we will showcase that work in the galleries as well.
Yeah, excellent. And you may be interested to know, there's a bit of insider information for you, that we are right on the verge of hiring the designers for the Egypt galleries. We have 10 hours of site visits next week from people who are competing for it. And then the week after that, we have 2 more hours of site visit and 12 hours of interviews with them. And then we'll ruminate on that for a week or two and hopefully come up with a candidate that everybody likes. Mm-hmm. So this is really happening right now. We have another, I thought naively, in the Egypt meetings as well, I thought Egypt, only 3 curators, be a small group, be easy. We have conservators, somebody who's an expert in moving stuff around in the building, learning programs, interpreter. There's still 10 people in the room. It's going to be another wild ride, I can tell you. But we're all looking forward to it. So I think at this point, we're ready to open the floor to questions.
Yeah,
yes?
sure. Yeah.
I'm a little confused. Gluckman, Tang, they're architects. Why do we need more architects?
We need these are exhibition designers,
Oh,
right? So they're the people who like work with us on the narrative, the stories that we're telling, and how the actual gallery is designed. Whereas the architects deal with the building itself. And so, yeah.
You showed 2 pillars against the wall.
Yeah, those are obelisks.
How much of that wall remains in terms of the entranceway? Does that doorway get higher?
There are 3 blocks, so it's about 18 feet in total.
Okay.
And so that's the good news, is you can separate those blocks out. And so there's 2 sides there, and then there are a series of doorways and a series of columns as well that will be going up there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When do you expect this transformation to be completed? I mean,
Well,
I'm the best of.
Right. Well, the first phase basically opens next year with the 2 galleries I mentioned. We're hoping for the end of 2021 for the Egyptian galleries, because it's going to take the conservation alone is going to take that long. But we'll work on it immediately. So, and of course, the price tag for the Egyptian galleries is very, very high, because not only are we doing those 2 galleries with their side galleries all on Egypt, but below we're building new storage for the Egyptian collection, which is right now we've moved it off site. It's around 50,000 objects, and that will be also a compact storage area, but it'll be a study area too, where scholars from around the globe can come and look at the material. Yeah.
If I understood you correctly, when you talked about tie rods to hold the walls, this gallery with these heavy objects is not actually on solid ground. There's empty space under it.
Yeah, there's
And the reason I asked, a few years ago we went through the airport in Paris and we got to a hotel room, the television was about to collapse of the terminal. It turned out when it was built there was a big discussion between the engineers who said it couldn't be built and the designers who said we were going to build it anyway. So if these things are up in the air, are we certain that in 10 years it's still going to be up in the air? I mean, I just point that out.
No, sorry. I mean, another thing that keeps me awake. Well, this building is actually, most of it is actually on bedrock, which is the good news, much the same way as the PMA is mostly on bedrock as well. Having said that, there are other areas which aren't, and they're just on sort of concrete platform. But I'm told it will work.
So we actually, perhaps I can comment a little on that. We actually have a big team of structural engineers and others who are evaluating the architect's proposals, because, as we know, as you just referenced, the architects may not always think of all the engineering aspects. So this has been scrutinized and re-scrutinized, and as Julian mentioned, there's a specialist in MIT who works on the structural engineering of Guastavino Vaults. And the thing about Guastavino Vaults apparently is that they're very good at accepting downward pressure, but they displace it laterally. So it's just like at many of the 18th century houses you see around the countryside here, you put tie rods in to offset the lateral stress, and they're telling us it'll all be fine. But well, I don't know, the flying buttresses might be a bit too much for the historic building. We might need to make it a Gothic revival.
Yeah. But it's a very interesting point. I mean, if you look at the rotunda with Harrison Auditorium under it, that is, as I mentioned, the largest masonry unsupported dome in the country. And we've never really had a good understanding of the weight that the rotunda can actually take in the Chinese galleries. So when we have events in there, we've always banned dancing, just to be on the safe side. But apparently our architect said, no, actually it's pretty strong. You could certainly do all that.
So I'm just curious whether you've come across any ownership issues. I mean, the Egyptians don't want their palace back, or others kind of stuff. Like,
well, we excavated with the government at the time, right? And so everything that we have from Egypt is documented essentially. I mean, some of you may know that the Egyptian archaeologist Zawi Hawass.
Yeah, he was here.
He was trained here, yeah. And so, I mean, he's actually, said that in fact, having Egyptian material here, there could be no better advertisement for Egypt. Right. And that's something that the new Minister of Culture has echoed. He actually sees this as an asset for people to become interested in Egypt and obviously want to go there.
Sure, but for example, the African exhibit, which you said is a collection as opposed to an excavation, right?
Yeah, that's going to be a more sensitive exploration, to be honest. I mean, one of the most sensitive objects in there are from Benin. We have a large collection of Benin bronzes, and most of these bronzes were accumulated during the British punitive expedition and then they were brought back to London and were sold to museums all over the world. And within the museum community, there's a real conversation going on about the legal ownership isn't disputed, but it's an ethical ownership. And so the British Museum, for example, and a number of French museums are organizing a loan program where they will circulate objects back to West Africa for the museums there, and as a temporary loans, which would then keep sort of flowing. And I know that Tukufu Zubiri is very keen that we explore relationships like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yes.
What's the future of the rotunda?
The rotunda is the final phase, yeah, and so it's always going to be home to the Asian material. But the rotunda is a real challenge because it's this wonderful architectural space that completely dominates any object you put in there. So basically you walk in there and your eyes go straight to the ceiling. And so the objects in there are very large in the rotunda, but in fact they get swallowed up by this space. And so what we're thinking of doing is actually dropping a lighting grid from the very center of the rotunda with hundreds of powerful lights. We reorganize the collection there, but actually to darken it so the objects sort of pop out more at you. But it will remain the home of the Asian collections and will be the last thing that this project does.
When are the panels coming back? The Asian panels?
The murals?
The murals, yeah, they're being conserved at the moment. You probably noticed that they've had some pretty. I do too. So they're actually in pieces being conserved, and we're not actually sure whether we want to install them before you do the full renovation, or actually as a part of the reveal when you actually do it. Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. The Harrison Auditorium's roof line was not, the other example of that here in Philadelphia is not just simply in West Philadelphia, St.
Francis of Sales.
Francis of Sales, right. It's also at the Franklin Institute.
Oh, I didn't know. Yeah.
If you'd like to see it, I'll show it to you.
I would like to see it.
Seriously. That was done obviously by his son, and when that was done in the 30s, that entire space simply replicates what was done in Rome a couple thousand years earlier.
Right.
So
very nice. Thank you for that.
Example of that architectural space being redone based on a space that had existed a couple thousand years earlier.
So yes.
Is there, all of these different things that are going on, is there going to be a time where when you want to bring visitors, nothing's open? Or, I mean, I'm just, I'm just wondering if they're going to overlap, will there be, I love bringing people to the, special shows, and just anybody who ever visits me has to come to the Penn Museum and see the Chinese horses and the ticket, and all the goodies. But will there still continue to be stuff on display while this
The answer
going
is yes. We don't want to close ever. So the
Yeah.
museum will remain open. But there will be a time where galleries are closed.
Of
though.
course.
So and we're actually a little concerned about Egypt coming offline. So we're doing a temporary gallery of Egypt. Some of the highlights of Egypt will be in the Pepper Gallery. So we'll always be able to use it for teaching.
Which is the Pepper Gallery? The one
That's
before
one
the
right
rotunda?
up, just as you come up the stairs,
Okay.
but right there.
Where Cultures in the Crossfire in there.
Yeah,
And
okay.
that gallery as well on the side.
Is the Marna stuff going to go back on display at some point?
Eventually,
That's
yes.
really,
Yeah,
there's
yes,
some very
it will.
nice things there.
Some lovely things in there. Yeah. Yes.
Is there, or will there be any way to get further up, closer to the dome for a better look at it?
In what way would you like to go up?
Like on one of the jacks that
No,
goes up and down?
Well, we have to use one of those jacks or do the.
Is there any, circular walkway or anything?
There actually, you can go up in the dome.
Inside?
Inside it, yeah. Yeah, but you're actually behind the dome. But I have yet to do it, although I would like to. Apparently you get pretty dirty in there. It's pretty.
Might be a real money-making tour.
Yeah, it might.
Especially at Halloween.
Yes.
Just first, congratulations on an absolutely stellar putting back together again the Middle Eastern Gallery.
Oh, thank you.
More and more and more, except those little numbers that go to the signs below still have to kind of come out of the printing shop, I think.
They're coming. In fact, we have a board meeting this week, and they're going in before that.
I think when Brian Rose had the Midas exhibit, what was such fun was to discover the history of the archaeology of this museum in that exhibit. And I wonder if that's going to still continue to be part of your focus. And I don't know, what are the ongoing excavations? Gordian certainly, but what else are the ongoing Penn excavations?
Well, we certainly intend to have our excavations front and center in all of the new galleries. We have a project I alluded to in Egypt. We have a project in France. We have several in Turkey. We have people working in Mesoamerica. We have a huge group of undergrads actually working with Meg Castlebaum with the Mississippian culture of Mississippi. And so really, I mean, there isn't anywhere that we've never had a presence in China, and that's something we'd like to change. We'd love to have an archaeologist who worked there. So that's the area. We have a new huge project in India as well, working in the Western Ghats too. So just about anywhere you can imagine, there's probably somebody from this museum working.
No, we've just moved here finally a year ago, and what's always exciting me about Penn and the Penn Museum is that it's long history in excavation.
Yeah.
And it's just wonderful to be able to see it, touch it, and to learn about it, and that you're still that museum. It's not a bunch of collected artifacts or whatever, or many donations, which are nice. It is truly, a lot of it is your own work.
Yes, absolutely. That's what makes this museum so unique. I mean, have any of you read a book called Gods, Graves, and Scholars?
Yes.
Yeah, it was written in the 50s by a German. It's been reprinted a gazillion times. You can get it. And I remember I got that book when I was 16. And it's the great discoveries of archaeology, maybe 10 of them. And 2 of them were done by this museum. They had and Tikal. So it's always had this very special place in the archaeological and art history world. Yeah.
Years ago, when I was first a member, we used to have these reports from the field where we'd have 2 or 3 different people on in the evening. And that was really cool. It seems like we've changed over more recent years where it's maybe just one person and you don't get as much of a overview of the different things. I love the Skypes in the summer. I think it's very, very cool. And I don't know if we're doing one this summer, but I think that's really...
So you prefer to have like 4 or 5 10-minute presentations?
We used to have 3.
Yeah, 3, and it was great. It was maybe an hour and a half altogether, maybe, a little bit more than an hour. I mean, I was working at the time. I wasn't a volunteer yet, but it was really cool. That's what got me sucked into it.
It's actually very useful to hear from you, because just when was it, Thursday, we had a meeting in which we discussed what the next reports from the field format would be like. and we discussed the fact of whether it should be one person or several, and we will take this
Now
back to
feed
the
that
team.
back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
The Philadelphia Museum of Art is undergoing a major transformation at the same time you are. Is
Right.
that just serendipity, or is there any coordination there?
It's actually is serendipity. I mean, we have a great relationship with the PMA, and I sort of meet with Timothy about every couple of months just to talk about both of our projects. We if you may remember, we loaned them around 250 of our African objects last summer, so that was a great project, and they, you know, as I mentioned, they're essentially giving us on long-term loan their Mesoamerican objects. So there was this agreement that you may not be familiar with. I think it was in the 30s, where we had stopped collecting at a certain time and they would start, and it largely holds true today. Yeah.
It'll be neat when both of these are all redone.
Yes, it would be fantastic. Yeah, it would be fantastic. Yeah. Yes.
I have a little bit different question. The museum is wonderful, and there's all these objects and knowledge. But it's my wife it's her field, so I have a little bit of difficulty kind of understanding everything. I suspect a lot of people would. When I was in the gift shop, the bookstore a little while ago, before an hour ago, and it's full of books and hard things. But what I'm trying to ask is, the computer is a very powerful tool presenting things and helping people understand. Is there any thought that in addition to having the things here, there could be some kind of a series of, I don't know, computer DVDs or whatever, where it would kind of go through, like we had the tour with the native from the Middle East today. Where there would be a better explanation of what it is, and these are the objects, and this is how we found them, and this is the significance, so we can really understand, because it's like, well, there's this piece that's kind of important for this, but where does it really fit in the grand scheme of things? What should I really understand about this? And I'm certain there's some way that these 10-year-olds today can make a program and all the technology to really understand.
Right.
You know? Is there any thought to doing something? And that might be a very good seller in the store, a series of...
Well, there is a companion to the Middle East galleries that Steve actually edited, that's coming out in the fall, and that's a pretty in-depth look at the context of the material from all of that. But your question is about, can we have a digital sort of version of that? And it's something we would be very interested in looking into. What would a digital tour of that place look like? And what sort of resources could we put online for people who have become interested in what they've seen, so to dig down a bit deeper. Yeah. Yes, yeah.
How you doing? I want to thank you for the renovation of the museum. I want to thank you. And one question is, I'm a member of the Pre-Columbian Society, and I'm a member of RC, the American Research Center in Egypt. The membership is going down, so is it possible you can work with the presidents of those organizations to increase?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know we have some of the RC lectures are here, aren't they, at the museum. So, yeah, I'm
Pre-Columbian lectures too.
I'd be happy to talk to their president about how we could help out to get their message out, to get the membership up. Yeah. Yes.
The Roman and Etruscan galleries, you haven't said anything about that. Are they to be considered as put or changed?
Well, they're not part of this project. When I sat down with the executive team here, we really wanted to strategically create a project that had a dramatic impact as possible, but was also manageable. And the Greek and Roman galleries are some of the most recent galleries that they have. So that's why we didn't include them in this particular renovation, but they would logically be the next ones to do when we're done, and we probably need a year or so to get our breath back.
But they were only about 15 years ago, I remember.
Right.
I mean,
That's true, but in 10 years they'll be 25 years old.
Oh, I understand that, but I think in context of, Africa obviously needs to go first, because that looks very traditional
Yeah,
fashion, whereas
Right.
Rome and Greece, they look pretty cool.
I think so. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for coming in today. But did you enjoy the Middle Eastern galleries, everybody? Okay, good. It was a good tour.